I'm Cathy, and welcome to our third season of At Home with Cathy. This season we're going to focus on something we're calling Renew. It's part of a fundraising project that we are going to do to hope to raise money for Chysalis House, our local women and children's center. Chysalis House is building a new building, and we thought it might be kind of fun to participate. So with their blessing, we are going to paint furniture for Chysalis House. And one of two things is going to happen. We're either going to paint furniture that belongs in the house when it's done, or we're going to auction it off at the end of the season and raise the funds so that Chysalis House can put the money towards their building fund. To do that, we're going to invite you to participate. But before we get to that point, I want to talk about what we're going to do to follow along for our techniques. As the first season, we used a painted recipes book from Annie Sloan. And then last year, we did the Quick and Easy Painted Projects, another Annie Sloan book. So following in that tradition, because it is Annie Sloan's chalk paint, I thought we might work with her magazines. There are actually three magazines out, but we're going to start with the first two, The Colorist. And this is the first one, this is the second one. What's interesting about Annie's magazines is they're not just about chalk paint. They're about color and fashion in the color world, and projects and inspiration, and kind of a story of what's going on in all parts of the world with color, with texture, with fabric, with ideas, with fashion. They're quite inspiring when you read through these. Not like your average magazine. There's no advertising. It's all just talking about what people are doing where. Great article here in Living in Color. A lot of the people in the magazines are artists or graphic designers. I mean, that is just wild and crazy, and you can't imagine using it in all kinds of places, but there might be an element in something here that works on a project that we would like to see through as a part of the fundraiser. It goes to the other extreme, very soft, very vintage looking, which is an incredibly current decorative element right now. But what we're going to focus on is the how-tos. At the back of every magazine are 6 projects, and they are step-by-step on how to do stenciling, two-color distressing, a botanical detail. And they're in both magazines. So as we go through this season, we're going to reference the how-tos in these magazines. So those are a very easy thing for you to pick up from me, your local stockist, or any local stockist with Annie Sloan paint products. And we're going to paint furniture that's donated. I'm still looking for about 5 or 6 pieces. The idea was, I've painted a lot of pieces for my home now. I really don't need more furniture. But I keep being asked, would you like this? Could you use this? Do you want to paint this? So I thought that's where the idea came from to actually do Project Renew. These are all collected pieces of furniture. We have tables, we have a chair, a little footstool, a little hanging piece that could be used in a bathroom or a back hall, a lovely picnic basket that I think could be repurposed as a side table or a storage place for knitting, say, a bedside table, a folding card table. And back at the store, we have this enormous dresser that we're actually going to paint at the store. So what I'm going to ask you to do is think about either one, donating a piece of furniture or something for me to paint that could be used at Chysalis House or as part of the auction, or painting along with me. Do your own piece and then donate that to the auction or to Chysalis House. So there'll be more at the end of the video on how you go about that. But welcome to the third season, and let's get started. Let's paint this picnic basket. Now you look at it and you see a picnic basket. Well, we tend not to go on picnics like this anymore, unfortunately. It sounds so romantic, but this one is probably a little bit homemade. It has a plywood top, and I've taken the liberty of painting the inside this beautiful Henrietta color. And before I painted it, I gave it, as always, a good wash. And I think that what I'm going to end up doing just to protect the inside is lacquering it. I don't think it's necessary to wax it because it's a bit tricky to get in here and wax it, but just to protect it so that if it is used for storage, the paint doesn't get damaged or if it gets wet, it doesn't transfer. I just wanted to protect it a little bit, but lacquering's a little faster. But what was interesting about it was it had a name on the lid. So before I painted it, I cut an oval of painter's tape to cover it, because I think I always like to preserve the story. So this was made, and I might have to tidy that up just a little bit. I'll get my knife out afterwards. Redmond, Peru, and I'm not sure if that's Industries or Indiana, but I read it as Redmond, Peru Industries. So I thought, that's kind of part of the story of the basket. We don't always want to lose that. And I just cut a little oval, traced it out by putting 3 pieces of painter's tape together to make sort of a patch, and then traced it out, and then just put it over the whole thing. And I'll take my knife and just clean out the paint right here. So I did take the liberty of pre-painting it to make it a little bit faster. On the outside of this, the story we're going to follow in the colorist is how to decoupage. Oops, wrong book. This is the 2nd issue of the colorist, and we're going to decoupage. We did a tray in one of our previous seasons, and I just thought the decoupage on the top of this would be pretty. So we're going to use paper napkins, which are going to look very springy, are going to match nicely with our Henrietta. But to make them bright, you can see here, if I put this napkin over the brown, it kind of dulls this. So we are going to paint the top of the basket white, like a primer coat. And you can see how that pops the color out. Look at that orange, so much brighter. When you look at it over here, it's dull. So that's what happens with all of those colors. So I'm going to paint the top in pure white before we do the decoupage. And then we're going to do the wicker in a custom color. I wanted a green that had this lemony yellow. Annie has a number of greens. There's Lem Lem, there's Antibes, and then there are a number that are more on the gray side. But this had a little bit more yellow in it. So I did a custom mix. And when I do that, I have all my colors out, and I'm playing. So this is Lem Lem. And I thought Lem Lem would actually be quite close, but it still has a little bit too much green. So I started with Antibes. I used Antibes green. I did 2 parts of pure white. I did it, and this was measured out with my handy measuring cup and spoons. So I did 1/4 cup of Antibes green, 2 1/4 cups, so it's 1 to 2 parts of the pure white, and then I did a teaspoon of Arles, which kind of brings me down to the golden color that's in the back of this green, but I still needed more yellow, so I did a teaspoon of the English yellow. And together, when I played with this, I got a color, and it's just very subtly different, but on the back here it dries to just a letter. So this is where I was playing. This is Lem Lem, a little bit too green. I want it a little brighter. So this is what I did, and that recipe, we'll post that recipe too. But you know what? You don't really need a recipe. You need to do it yourself, but then write it down. And remember, always when you're testing your color mixes, let them dry, because the color changes when it's from wet to dry. So that's how I played with it. When we paint wicker, we water the paint down just a little bit so that it actually gets in all the wicker. So we're going to do that. The first thing we're going to do is put away all these so I don't get paint on them. And we're going to paint. I'm using pure white. I've stirred it all up. And I'm painting right over the hinges in this case, because I don't need to make them stand out. And I'm starting here where some of my pink Henrietta came through a little bit. Going every which way with my paint to make sure that I get great coverage. And again, this is going to be more of a base coat because I just need a little bit of white to brighten that napkin. When I paint something with an edge like this, I always make sure I paint towards the edge and then I don't get drips all the way around. We'll come back and do that edge in green when we do the rest of the basket. But I do want to make sure I get into... The thing about a lot of old pieces of furniture too is that they're going to have little dings and nicks, and this technique is great for working into all of those, working some paint in so that I hide those little dents, because you can see, you come in here, if I just take the brush and go over the top, you can see where there are little dents, and using my round brush helps me get paint wiggled right into all of those little spots so we don't have dark spots later when we finish. All the round brushes have a split end finish. Not good when you're talking about your hair, but good when you're talking about a round chalk paint brush. There, might need a second coat. The other thing I find about old wood is that often it's very dry, and because of that it will absorb a lot more paint than you might have expected. So I'm going to let that dry, but while we're letting that dry, we're going to start painting the green. So while I was getting all this ready, Sean the cameraman made a great suggestion. He said you could cut a Lego base and put it right on top here, glue it to it, probably epoxy, cut it to fit, and then store all the Lego inside. What a great idea, Sean. I think you're a daddy. Yeah. So I made my recipe up last night. So I know that it's probably separated a little bit. Not too bad, actually. I'm just going to give it a bit of a stir to make sure I have all those pigments, because I combined 4 different colors to get this soft minty color. But it's still quite thick. And if I put the paint straight on the wicker thickly like this, it's not going to be easy to work it in. Wicker has such little thin strips and little spaces. I don't want the paint globbed on. I want it in there a little bit more, not just running on the surface. So I'm going to measure out 1/4 cup of my mix. And you know what? It is important to measure it, because if you don't, what's going to happen is you're going to add too much water the next time, not enough water. You're not going to get the same consistency. So I've measured out 1/4 cup. I'm going to pour that into here. This is my second jar, because what I'm going to do is add a bit of water. I want to just loosen this paint a little bit so that it goes into the wicker. I'll paint full strength when it comes to things like the handles. So I'm going to put the lid back on here. Just move this off to the side. And to start with, because I don't know exactly how much water I want, I'm going to add a teaspoon. And I'm going to stir that up and just see how loose that gets. A teaspoon of water in 1/4 cup of paint is a lot. Give it a really good stir. That's probably going to be good. And I am going to clean out. That's the other little tip I forgot, is you should always clean it out with a spatula. I probably had another 1/2 teaspoon or so of paint left clinging in the bottom of the measuring cup. Again, that's a lot of paint when you're talking about 1/4 cups and teaspoons. Let's try that. The other thing is, start with a wet brush. When you start with a wet brush, you're not going to absorb as much paint into the bristles of the brush. Nice wet brush. dry it off a little bit. I don't want it to be super liquidy. Now I'm going to tip it a little bit on its side, just so I can work it. And I'm going to start painting. So with wicker, I need to make it work in all the way around. I don't want to see little brown spaces, so you're going sideways. You're going to go every which way. And I'll finish up I'll make it tidier up here on the edge with solid paint, because that's solid wood, but I'm just using the brush right now to get into all of those little edges. And I'm only working with the tips of the brush. Chalk paint is never the kind of paint that you need to dip your whole brush into the paint. Go up here. These round brushes are great because those bristles get in there. Most wicker has had a varnish of some kind on it too. So you can see that if you're looking up close, you can actually see there's a brown hint. I can wipe the paint back off. This will probably take 2 coats in order to make it as green as I would like it to be. I'm going to paint around here, and we'll come back in a few minutes and see if it needs a second coat. So let's have a look closely at the top of this hamper. Now we used pure white paint. You see the little brown streaks? Little dark marks? This is where there's a brush stroke and the paint isn't covering all the way along. I'm talking about little fine brown lines. That is the varnish. The oil that was in the original varnish is coming through. A lot of varnishes that were put on things, or lacquers that were done on projects back, say, from the 20s and 30s, were fish oil products. And that fish oil never, ever dries. So it'll come through. But it could just be the staining of whatever was used on this. It didn't come through here on the pink, which I find kind of interesting. So it's something that was on the top of the basket, and it's consistent all the way across. So it is probably the finish. Now I'm going to put an applique over that. It's probably not going to show through, but I can see where some of the dark lines are, where the paint didn't come through. So I'm going to do a second coat of white on this. Same thing. And we're going to do half of it. And then, because it's a little bit boring to just stand around watching paint dry, we'll talk about how we're going to do the decoupage for the other half. And then we will show how you finish this in another show. After doing this at home with Cathy for 2 years, I realized it's almost impossible to get everything finished in one show. Poor Sean would be here from breakfast till supper, and that would be a long day for him, watching paint dry. So we're just going to get a second coat on this, and we'll let this dry. But we'll pretend we put a second coat on the other side, and we'll talk about how we're going to get ready to do the decoupage. Anybody who's followed my series, last year we did a tray, and one of the funniest moments was me trying to peel paper napkins apart. So these are just 3-ply paper napkins. 3-ply paper napkins are usually a good quality paper napkin, so there's strength in each layer, which is what you want, because you're going to get this wet, it's going to tear, and you want it to not tear and rip and fall apart on you. You just want it to stay in one piece but still work. So I have peeled the back 2 layers off. I'm going to use decoupage glue. The decoupage glue is two things. It's both the glue that I'll put on here and then press my napkin into, but it's also the surface. So it's my protective coat as well. Now you can see this napkin isn't quite wide enough to fill my whole top lid of my basket. It also had little tiny punctures all the way around it. So I'm going to start from where those punctures end, and I'm going to crease it all the way around, keeping it smooth, crease it so that I know where to cut it. And I'll cut it on that edge. I'll use a second piece. I will rip the edge here to keep it soft, and then I'll try and line up my next butterfly if possible so that it looks natural. I'm going to rip this right here so that I can get rid of that sort of pinpricked edge. And I'll play with this a little bit. I don't want my butterflies, because it's quite a distinct pattern, I may even have to go further in. But I'm going to play with this, and I'm going to have it all lined up before I do any glue. So that's the next important part of this. Get it all lined up, I'm going to do a nice clean edge here. I want to paint that green, which I'm also going to do before I do my decoupage. I'm going to pull off the rippled punctured edge here, because I think that's going to show up when I start using the glue to adhere it. And I'm going to have them all ready and lined up before I do any gluing. Now let's have a look here and see what happened with the front of the basket. It's dry, and that's not a bad look. I can see a little bit of the brown coming through. But I think I would like to have two coats. I think I'd like to have that a little bit a darker green so that it contrasts really nicely. So we're going to put a second coat on here and just see how that looks. Oh yeah. As soon as I do that, there's a brightness to it, which is really nice. You just have to keep working your brush sideways. And I just work with the tips of the brush. And if I get a little paint on the inside of the lid, I noticed when I opened that up, I got a little bit of green on there. I'll just go back when I'm all done with a touch-up of Henrietta and get rid of that on the inside so that it looks tidy. Now sometimes when you're painting wicker, you don't have a nice board in behind it. This piece actually has a liner in behind it, and if you don't have that and you're just painting wicker, you do have to go stop every so often and go on the inside and catch the drips so that they don't look messy. So we'll do a second coat all the way around, and of course I'll finish with the first coat. Now when we look at this piece next, I also have these little feet. So these are little cushion glides. They just like a big kind of tack, and I'll be able to put those right here on the bottom and raise this off the floor a little bit excuse me, so that if there's any rough wood here, it can slide and be used as a basket or a storage container but not scratch your floor. So that's a great way to finish a piece that never had any feet. You don't really want it to have feet, but you might want it to actually have a little bit more of a protection. So the next time you see this piece, we'll have a decoupage, we'll have 2 coats of paint, and it will be ready to be a functioning piece for our auction. Thank you for joining me for this episode of At Home with Cathy. There are 3 ways you can participate in our Renew project. 1, donate a piece for me to paint. Send me a picture though, I can't paint everything. And we're still looking for 4 or 5 pieces that we need to paint, and we will paint and donate them to the auction or to Chysalis House. 2, you paint along with me. Come in and get some paint, we'll consult on colors, we'll give you a discount on your purchase. You paint along with me and donate your piece to the auction in May, and we'll make sure those funds go directly to Chysalis House. Or 3, what if you don't want to paint or donate? You could donate cash. Project Renew is a building fundraiser for Chysalis House. You can contact them directly to make arrangements on how to donate. Welcome to the project.